Today I'm here with Manny Diaz. This is Thompson Brown with World Tennis Magazine, and I have the pleasure of speaking to Manny Diaz, who spent 36 years as the head coach of Georgia men's tennis and is the winningest coach in SEC history. But he also took over for my great grandfather, Dan Magill. So it's a cool moment for me. I get to ask Manny some questions about his relationship with Dan Magill, as someone who got to know him very well. So. Manny, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to join you, Thompson.
All right, so first off, I want to know when did you first hear of Dan McGill and the University of Georgia?
I must have been a sophomore in high school when a new tennis pro walked into our club in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Tony Ortiz. And Tony had played for Coach McGill 1 year and had the misfortune of partying a little bit too much his freshman year and flunked out of the University of Georgia. Tony was a national junior champion in doubles in the US. He had gone to Baylor School, a very good private school,
Sure.
and they were number one in the country in high school tennis in the US. They actually had a phenomenal team. Uh, Brian Godfrey, Zan Geary, among others. Tony joined them there. And they won the national high school championship. But anyway, he came to Georgia as a scholarship player under Coach McGill, and they that was the beginning of scholarships at the University of Georgia. Georgia didn't have any scholarships
Yeah.
until 1968, I believe, and he went in. I believe the second year they had tennis scholarships there, maybe. The first scholarship athlete at Georgia was in 1968, and it was a young man from Piedmont Driving Club in Atlanta.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and anyway, Tony was originally from Puerto Rico, and both his parents were my family's ophthalmologists. They were
Okay.
both doctors,
That's funny.
well-known family in San Juan, a very successful practice they had. And Tony got a little bit lost at the University of Georgia, um, and had to come back to Puerto Rico. And he was very apologetic about what happened at the University of Georgia. And he started telling me stories about Georgia tennis. And he felt very badly about, what he had done. And he loved Coach McGill and loved playing for him and fell in love with the University of Georgia, even though he was only there a year. And so from the start, when he started coaching me, and again, I must have been a sophomore at the university, I'm sorry, in high school.
Yeah.
He started telling me about Georgia and how I needed to consider that when the time came. So anyway, he was a very good coach, and he helped me improve a lot. And so I went from about being because I started tennis very late in life. I was almost 14 years old,
Okay. Oh,
13 and a half years old. So I was coming, up. And when I started working with Tony, I must have been like number six in the island. But by the time I was starting my senior year in high school, I had improved to about number two in Puerto Rico. And so Tony started writing Coach McGill. Back then, it was no emails. It was actually phone calls were like very expensive. There were no cell phones. There were no
yeah.
texts. And so these were letters that were exchanged between Coach McGill and Tony wrote him a letter about me as a player and as a young man. And one of his famous lines that Coach McGill quoted in so many introductions and speeches later on, that pertained to me. He said I got the best recommendation from a boy that had basically flunked out of Georgia, uh, and his line to him, to Coach McGill, Tony's line to Coach McGill is, Manny's a good boy. He's as good as I was bad. And he said that Coach McGill would always joke that that was the best recommendation he had ever gotten about anybody in jest, because Tony was such a lost cause at the moment. But anyway, Tony established a conversation with us. So Coach McGill wrote us a letter,
Okay.
and we wrote back, and we talked about visiting, but we knew so little about college tennis, and maybe just were a little bit didn't understand the recruiting process. So my father and I arranged a trip up to the University of Georgia. We decided, well, it's time. We need to figure out what we're going to do next year, right? Where
Yeah.
are we going to go to school? And we knew scholarships were available. Back then, men had 8 scholarships. So after great back and forth with Coach McGill about a visit, we just decided, we just booked a ticket. You know, back then they could pay for your travels
Okay.
and your visit, but we didn't know that. So we booked our tickets, and we booked our hotel at the Georgia Center for Continuing Education right on campus. And we were to visit Georgia, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I think Wake Forest, and Mississippi State. Um, and so we embarked on this trip, except we didn't tell Coach McGill we were coming. We didn't plan an official visit of any sort with the university with
Yeah.
Coach McGill. So we showed up at the University of Georgia. We rented a car at the Atlanta airport. We drove to Athens, and uh, uh, I'm not sure if we knew there was a match that day.
Oh, really?
So either that, or we just found out when we got there.
Okay.
We were that clueless about the whole thing. And and so we walked from the Georgia Center to the tennis courts. As you know, it's not but 200 steps, maybe,
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And we came down, and we see all these people in the grandstand, and there's a match going on, and a lot of clapping and hooting and hollering, and we walked through the little clubhouse, and we saw the grandstands along court one, and we didn't know what Coach McGill looked like. We had no idea, so we asked, and we asked, where's Coach McGill? Where's Dan Magill? And so somebody pointed him out in the corner and went and got him. And Coach McGill came down, and he was in his usual colorful attire, probably Madras shirt and a polka dot pair of pants and his
Sounds about right.
houndstooth hat. And he, he just well, he was surprised. He was surprised as to we had to tell him who we were. Um, and so, yeah, so he was very surprised, and like engaging as always, and very charming. And we just sat with him and watched the match, and he just engaged in conversation and asked a lot of questions. And it was a tremendous environment for me to see as a, high school student, and enjoying his first college match.
Sure.
And yeah, the first night there, he apologized that he had to leave town because he was also director of the Bulldog Club, the fundraising arm for the Athletic Association. So he had to speak. I believe it was in Augusta that night. So he
Oh,
had
wow.
to he had to. He says, but he had a small conversation with an older gentleman that was sitting in the grandstand. We were not privy to it, but he arranged for us to go to dinner that night at the home of Danny Birchmore, Fred Birchmore, and Willadine Birchmore, Danny's parents.
Okay.
Uh, because, back then there wasn't a whole lot in Athens. So, we went to dinner at the Birchmore's house that night, and had a great experience. And the next day, I got to play. Joe Frierson Sr., a little bit of tennis on a lower court. Coach McGill couldn't watch because of NCAA, rules at the
Yeah.
time, but Joe Frierson asked me to play a little bit of tennis, and I said, "Yeah, why not? I'd love to." And that day we played, and I'm sure Coach McGill, I'm sure he went like, "Can he play?" or like, "How good can he be?" or something along those lines. Anyway, the following day on Sunday, I think we got there Friday. On Sunday before we left, Coach McGill offered me a full scholarship. And, during those 2.5 days, whatever we were there, we got to kind of drive around, went downtown Athens, saw the environment, old campus. We got to walk around the old campus with Coach McGill. He showed us the university, a beautiful old campus. And we also got to kind of cruise around Millis Circle. And, we happened to visit um, Athens, Georgia, sometime in mid-April when all of the azaleas and all of the
It's beautiful.
dogwoods and all of the red buds are in bloom. And, and Millage Avenue was filled with girls walking up, beautiful girls walking up and down the sidewalks. And, we just, I fell in love with Athens. And when Coach McGill offered me a scholarship, I went like, we can go home now. We don't need to see any other
Yeah.
university. And I signed with the university a little later. He sent me the papers through the mail, but I wouldn't recommend that to prospects just
Yeah.
after the first visit, because every visit is probably beautiful, right?
Sure.
And you're going to have a great experience.
Yep.
But I basically told my dad, I know where I want to go. We can go home, and we did. We came back to Puerto Rico.
That's awesome. It's funny how it all worked out. It sounds like you probably could have saved a little bit of money, but
Yeah.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yes.
Um, and then when you got to the University of Georgia, besides his clothing, what did you first notice about Dan McGill, and what did the practices look like day to day?
I came from a good school of coaching. Welby Van Horn was my coach starting out, and then Tony, who learned from Welby. So they were very technical. And Coach McGill didn't pick up tennis until he was in his 30s. And
That's right. Yeah.
he learned tennis from reading books. And then he started playing, but he was a ping pong player. He had never played tennis, so he actually held his racket by the throat. He didn't even hold the racket by the grip.
That's
And
news to me. I didn't know
when
that.
yeah, when he started, he would show us. I have a racket somewhere, but he would grab the racket by the throat, a little between the head of the racket and the grip,
Yeah.
and because he was accustomed to ping pong, and he's a very good ping pong
Yeah.
player. But that's how he did, and he chopped everything. So technically, Coach McGill was not your wow tennis
Doesn't sound like it.
technical coach, but he became very learned about the sport, and he was I considered him a very good tactical coach.
Okay.
He learned percentage tennis, and he was as a retired Marine, soldier, like as a retired Marine, he was very disciplined. And so every moment at practice was very planned. He had drills for us, one after the other, and then we played a lot, to be honest with you. His method was based on a lot of competition. So we had, round robin challenge match system in the fall, because we didn't have a whole lot of tournaments in the fall. When I was playing in the early 70s, we only had like one tournament in the
Okay.
fall.
Wow.
And my senior year, we added a second one. Now you have tournaments every week, just about, and you can pick and choose. But we just had a tournament. We hosted the Southern Intercollegiates at the University of Georgia,
Right.
and that was it for me until my senior year when we went to a second tournament at the University of South Carolina. And again, you got to remember that, budgets for men's tennis or women's tennis barely existed at the University of Georgia. It was a club sport until a little bit later. Um, our budgets were very limited, so we didn't have money to travel around. People that came before me at the University of Georgia, they traveled in their own private cars. I'm not even sure they got reimbursed for gas. It was Coach McGill's station wagon and another private car that belonged to one of the players, and the players
Wow.
drove to tournaments. This is in the 50s and 60s. Coach McGill took over the tennis program in 1954. So, I came in as a player in the fall of 71. So, we had scholarships, like I said, by then, and the sport had, evolved competitively a good bit. And the year before I landed at the University of Georgia, I got there in the fall of 71. The spring of 71, they won their first SEC championship. And again, we got to remember that 68 was the first scholarship year, and it was only two scholarships that year. And I think they grew it to be able to compete with Florida. Tulane had been a perennial power. Georgia Tech had a very good program before in the 60s. They had very successful teams. So, in between 68, 69, 70, and 71, they actually attracted enough good players.
Hmm.
And again, the Piedmont Driving Club in Atlanta during those years and tennis in Atlanta was actually very good. It's just that most of those good players, but during those years before 1968, would go to places where they could get a scholarship, and Georgia
Yeah, that
didn't
makes
have
sense.
any.
Yeah,
Yeah, Georgia didn't have any. But it only took Coach McGill 4 or 5 years to really get to winning the SEC on a regular basis. So we won the SEC in 71 before I got there. And then my 4 years, we won four times in a row. So we started winning the Southeastern Conference on a regular basis in the early 70s.
that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know Atlanta tennis was that solid back then, but
Well,
impressive.
Jack Waters was the pro at Piedmont Driving Club. He was a very good friend of Coach McGill's, and he helped Coach McGill start recruiting players out of his little school,
There you go.
club, and that got us started as a program.
Awesome. And I've heard a lot of the stories with Georgia Tech, but do you have any funny stories that you can share about Coach McGill when you were a player and as a coach even?
Yeah, I mean, he just despised Georgia
Yeah,
Tech.
I know that
And you
much.
gotta remember that probably it was because Georgia Tech was very good in football,
Hmm.
and he was Coach Butts, Wally Butts's public relations guy. I mean, he was Coach Butts' right-hand man. He was a public relations director. This is before we had a sports information department. So he would travel with Coach Butts all across the state to raise money in the early and late 60s when we were struggling financially as an athletic department. We also struggled competitively because Georgia Tech was at their height, the top of their game, and they were a very good football team. So in the 60s, I believe, uh, yeah, early 60s, maybe even late 50s, they were beating us regularly in football, and made it very difficult for us to compete in both football and any other sport.
Yeah,
Um, Athens was considered like the country, like out there. Why would you even leave Atlanta? And back then, Atlanta wasn't what it is now. It was a nice southern city with all of the, advantages, I guess. So, I think a lot of his hatred for Georgia Tech came from the fact that, we came from down where we were losing to them on a regular basis, and
yeah. Yeah.
Nobody like, and I've never seen anybody as competitive as Coach McGill. I mean, he just hated to lose, and that was a great quality that inspired us. He just prepared us in the right way because of his competitive spirit when it came to our men's tennis team, and um, he taught us discipline, and he uh, he was a great leader. I think one of the things about your great grandfather was that he also, while he was a very strong leader, he also had a great sense of humor. So he had a great sense of humor, and he could he was very self-deprecating. He could joke about himself. He could
Okay.
make fun of himself. So as a young college student, that's what you do. You kind of mess around. You
Yeah.
make fun of each other. You like like, but it's all in good faith,
Of course.
and he was able to relate to his players, and his players loved him for that. He had a great sense of humor. Back then, he allowed you to celebrate after a good victory. One of the greatest things, if I could never do that as a head coach because
Yeah.
times changed. But I mean, we won a big match. He was buying a case of beer,
Oh,
and
there you go.
he would let you have a beer or two on the way back home.
That's not the
And
story today, I don't think. Maybe for some coaches.
that's right. But it was part of you know growing up,
Yeah.
and yet he was there and make sure nobody's stepping out of line and nobody's drinking too much. But
Of
it
course.
was yeah, he was able to relate to his players. Let's put it that way.
That's funny. Yeah, my grandparents and parents didn't tell me that, but I appreciate you letting me know. Um, and then tell me about the lead up to the NCAA's first being held in Athens and how Coach McGill pulled that together and how that tournament first went.
Yeah, I mean, I was a freshman
Okay.
um, the first time we ever hosted the NCAAs.
That's pretty
And
epic.
your great grandfather he was a colorful, he was great at promoting events. In the 40s or whatever, he was famous for promoting a snake fight in a gym in Athens, where I think it was a boa constrictor and a rattlesnake would get to fight. And he went around town and he sold tickets. This is as a young man. I'm not even sure if he was out of college or right out of college. And he just promoted at Stegman, the old Stegman Field, by the football stadium down there. There was a small gym where they played basketball. I mean, it was a small gym,
Yeah.
and he supposedly promoted a fight between Rast. He even gave the snakes a name, Rasta's Rattler. Okay, the Rastaslap Rattler versus the other one. I don't know what the other name was, but he sold a lot of tickets and a lot of people were there, and the great event came, and he had the cheerleaders and the band and all that
No
stuff, and
way.
he promoted stuff like
Wow.
that. And
That's
but
hilarious.
but the two snakes refused to fight. And I think he had to reimburse
Yeah, I was gonna
everybody
say, who gets the
50
money?
cents, 50 cents for coming and watching the snake fight. Anyway, so that gave you an example of like he was a promoter. He promoted our sport better than anybody. That's why Georgia tennis had the biggest crowds of any college program in the nation. And as a freshman, I got to witness. So that first year at the University of Georgia, the NCAAs, it was the first time Coach McGill. It was the first time the event had chairs for the players to sit down during the changeover.
Changeovers? Wow.
Yeah, nobody ever had put chairs for the players on the court. He had scoreboards on every court because he went like, how are we going to grow our sport if fans coming to watch do not know the score of the match.
Yeah.
So not only did he get scoreboards, chairs, scoreboards, but he had every match chair umpired at the University of Georgia. He had every match during that 1972 NCAA championship. Every match was had a chair umpire. Now they were back in those days.
Yeah.
They were just uh, tennis players. They knew how to keep score.
Yeah.
They knew how to call the lines, but I don't know that they did. I can't remember if they did or not. But more than anything, he wanted somebody to scream out the score. You know, Smith leads 5-2 in the
Sure.
first set. And so people could follow college tennis across six courts because you had umpires on the chairs for the first time. So I feel like, our sport really took a step up and you also have to remember he was a sports information director. So he
Yeah.
knew every sports writer in the state. So the NCAA tournament had incredible publicity in the local papers.
I bet. Yeah.
Whether it was Athens, Georgia, Atlanta, he knew the sports editor at all of these, and he just made some phone calls and hey, you owe me a favor or whatever it was. And Coach McGill as a sports information director, he was he was the one doing all of the press releases, right? So he would actually write the articles. If somebody didn't have a reporter that was able to kind of come, so he would write the articles and here, publish this. So he wore a lot of hats.
Yeah. He's busy.
Yeah, wore a lot of hats and he had tremendous energy. He was a great promoter, like I've, kind of just mentioned. And I think that first year, I think all of the coaches that were involved couldn't believe it. We had crowds in the stands, we had umpires, we had chairs, we had water at every court. We didn't have water in on every court. So all of those little details, he promoted it and organized a great event. And the tournament had already, so this was 72, the tournament had already been awarded for 73, 74
Okay.
and 75 and 76. I think it was a 5-year contract or 6-year contract. And the tournament didn't come back until 1977 because it was the first opportunity that we could get because they had already awarded it somewhere
Sure.
else.
Yeah.
And after that, we hosted umpteen years. I can't remember whether it was 15 or 18 years in a row because people realized how much better it was in Athens.
That's great. Yeah, I'm sure that helped with recruiting as well and bringing a lot of good juniors.
Well, yeah, that definitely helped our recruiting.
Yeah.
And I think it was also one of the reasons why some coaches, the more we advanced as a program, the better we got because of, not only hosting the NCAAs, but we kept winning the Southeastern Conference on a
Yeah.
regular basis. Um, uh, you know, some rumblings started to happen about this, this is a home court advantage after we won the NCAAs for the first time in 1985 and won it again in 1987. There were, the Clemson coach, the USC coach, some of the coaches started going like, okay, this is too much of an advantage now.
Yeah, I bet
When
they
we
did.
weren't winning, nobody had a problem with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we the USC coach got the event to go to uh, Palm Springs one year and nobody showed up. And then
Yeah.
in 1997, we went to UCLA and, Dick Leach, and I don't know that I've ever told anybody this. Dick, in after 1997, when it was, they had already sent they had already sent the tournament to Palm Springs. Notre Dame hosted it one year. I think that was 94.
Okay. I know that.
And then it went to UCLA in 1997. The USC coach, who was Dick Leach, who, he had a lot of animosity because he felt like his teams were good enough to win, but they couldn't win in Athens. Uh, and he was one of the loudest voices for the tournament to be changed outside of Athens. After those three events, he came to me and said, I was the biggest proponent of moving the tournament out of Athens and somewhere else, but I tried it at Palm Springs, UCLA, Notre Dame. We're like, Georgia's the best place to have the
Yeah.
tournament. I give in.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you hear nowadays as well with
Yeah.
debating whether it should be in Orlando, which is obviously a great facility, but for college tennis, I think it's probably best to host in Athens. This year was really fun to watch, and there were good crowd turnout as well.
Yeah.
And
Even
then one
when
more.
Georgia's not playing, even when
Yeah,
Georgia's not
exactly.
playing.
That's right.
Our community just gets behind the tournament. Having Atlanta with so many tennis players.
Yeah.
Atlanta is the largest tennis playing community in the country.
Hmm.
And you know what? And people now know about Athens. They love the atmosphere. Our Not only our facilities are like second to none, but the community it's such a great little trip for anybody around the Southeast. But people come from all across the country,
Yeah.
and they decide to come down to Athens, for 4, 5, 6 days and just enjoy great tennis. So it's become a destination of sorts. Um, and Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I got one more question, please. After you played for UGA, how did you get back to become the assistant coach and then eventually the head coach for so many years?
Yeah, after I graduated, I hurt my shoulder. I blew out my shoulder, and I tried to, I was seated at the NCAA tournaments in singles. I had hopes of winning the NCAAs. I had recently, in the middle of the spring of my senior year, defeated John Whitlinger, who was the defending NCAA singles and doubles champion.
Wow.
I had high hopes as a player, but they were dashed when I hurt my shoulder towards the end of the season before the SEC and the NCAA tournament. Uh, I played both of those events and had to pull out. Um, I tried to come back to Athens. I rested it, tried to play that summer, and I just couldn't do it.
Okay.
So I went to a set to get a second opinion from an orthopedic doctor, and he said, we either have to operate, and back then there was no arthroscopic surgery. So they have to open you, from front to back, and you were done as an athlete, right? You were
Yeah.
done as a player.
Yeah.
Or you can take one entire year and let it rest and let it heal and then go through a rehabilitation period where you strengthen everything around those tendons and muscles and all that stuff. And then you can see where you are. So I came back to Athens the year after I concluded my senior year. I came back to Athens and helped Coach Magill as sort of as a volunteer while I had therapy on my shoulder
Okay.
and I couldn't play. So I was able to kind of just be his little assistant. Back then, he didn't have an assistant. It was only one coach.
Yeah.
And at that point, I kind of just went like, yeah, I can see myself coaching. Um, but I never thought an opportunity to coach at the University of Georgia would come around. So I tried. I based myself out of Atlanta after that, and I tried to continue to play. And I was able to play some tournaments, but my game was never the same. My serve, I would say, which was the strongest part of my game, was never better than 75 to 80%.
Okay. Yeah.
But I was able to compete, and I was number one player in Georgia. that didn't mean a whole lot. But
It
I
does. Come
competed
on.
in Puerto Rico. I competed in futures events, and I got to about 250 in the ATP tour at that time. But it was never like I could never stay healthy. It was always like I would play a couple of weeks and I had to take a week off, or I could play 4 or 5, and maybe then I had to take 2 or 3 weeks off. It was always something. My shoulder was never completely healed. So I started teaching around, coaching around Atlanta,
Okay.
some, and then I had the opportunity. They offered me the head coaching position, head pro at a very incredible resort in Puerto Rico.
Oh, wow.
So I moved to Puerto Rico. I think that must have been in 1981 or 80, early 82. And I was living the life. I was living in a resort, no expenses. I had a condo on the beach. I could eat at any of the hotel, resorts, 7 restaurants for
Sounds like a good
free.
gig. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I was putting every cent I made on the tennis court in my pocket because I had no expenses. And I was close to my family after
Sure.
being away from my family in Puerto Rico for 10 years. I was kind of back home and, able to see my parents on a regular basis and go to dinners with them and that kind of stuff. And let's see, we may have moved down there. I may have moved down there in like early 82, early in
Okay.
1982. Well, by the summer, I think sometime late summer, midsummer, yeah, or maybe even early summer, Coach McGill started calling me. He called me and said, I'm thinking about, I'm in my last few years. Like I got a plan for the future, and I would like for you to come to Athens and be my assistant. And after 2 to 3 years, uh, maybe I can turn the program over to you. But I'd like to teach you, and for you to study under me, and I'd like to teach you everything that's behind the scenes that maybe you're not aware of, and that kind of, and I need a good assistant, right?
Yeah.
And so I let me think about it, and you know, Coach McGill is very insistent, and I actually the next time we talked, I thought about it. I told him, Coach, I thought about it. I'm happy where I am. I'm happy seeing my parents. I'm making a lot of money right now, quote unquote. I'm doing well. I'm happy. I'm close to my family for the first time in 10 years. Uh, the timing is not great.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to have to pass. I can't believe I did that. And anyway, Coach McGill called me 2 weeks later, and it
Yeah.
was like, I really want you to come. And I told him no again. He called me every 2 weeks. And after like the sixth call over a 2 month period,
You gave in.
yeah, he convinced and in my mind, the reason I did it is because while I was at the time felt like I was making good money and I was in a good place, I also knew that 4 of the greatest years of my life were spent in Athens, Georgia,
Yeah.
the University of Georgia. It was just the most incredible ride for me, right? So that, and then while I was making good money at the time as a young guy
Yeah.
in his 20s, still in his 20s, I also started thinking, well, I'm teaching little old ladies and I'm teaching freaking ancient guys and grandchildren that are here for a week. And it wasn't as rewarding as as coaching in a competitive environment and developing players. That was something that really filled my cup.
Sure.
And so the more I thought about it, the more I went like, I don't know if I can do what I'm doing now for 30 years,
Long term.
but I
Yeah.
know that I can do that for 30 years at the University of Georgia or 40 or whatever. It wound up being 42. Uh,
Yeah.
But by then, you go like, I got maybe 30 years where I can like coach. Do I really want to be coaching this or do I want to be coaching that? And
Yeah.
motivating young athletes that want to be their best and trying to get people better and developing young athletes, not only in the athletic arena, but as people. I knew the difference that Coach McGill made in my life, and I was motivated to be able to try to do that for people.
Yeah. Definitely sounds more fulfilling, but I mean,
Yeah.
closer to your parents, back home. Sounds like a sweet setup. So I'm sure it was a tough
Yeah.
decision, but the six
Yeah.
phone calls probably helped.
Yes.
Well, yeah, thank you again, Manny. That's going to
Sure
wrap
thing.
it up, but we are hoping to do some more interviews documenting the history of Georgia tennis here on the World Tennis Magazine YouTube channel. But again, thank you so much, Manny. Great talking to you,
Good to
and we
be
look
with you.
forward to. Thank you all for watching.
Take care.
Take care.